Hello, everybody. Good to be here. This is my first time trying to stream on YouTube, so I'm excited and also a little bit concerned with all the video switching and stuff I have to do, but let's dive in. My hope today is I can answer questions that people have about the course and about Strobe itself, do some synthesis there. And so we have the chat open. The one thing I would recommend you do is set your streaming, the YouTube video, set it to be the highest quality. So that way, when we open Strobe, you can kind of see the deal there, right? All right. Glad to hear it's looking good. I have to adjust some little sound things in my setup here. Give me one moment. Really happy to see some names I know here. That gives me comfort. And so let me just start by asking, do you guys have any questions about the course or about synthesis in general that I can address in this stream? Really happy to see some names I know here. All right. Well, I'll just dive into Strobe then. I'll be monitoring the comments as I play with Strobe, and we get some details. If you have questions as I go, just type them into the chat there, and I'm happy to address them. So I thought we could start by doing a kind of overview of Strobe and of just synthesis in general. What is synthesis? All right. Synthesis in general is the creation of sound starting from algorithms, right? So you're starting from very basic either trigonometric functions or looped waveforms, right? Like a sine wave is a trigonometric function, and you loop that, create sound. The general idea is to start with a very, very complex waveform, and by complex we mean it has lots of upper harmonics. So something like a sawtooth waveform or a square waveform includes lots of upper harmonics, and then we can use our filter section to remove the sound of that we don't want. And that's kind of the nature of subtractive synthesis. The idea is you start with something very complex and you remove the stuff you don't want, and that makes the filter kind of one of the most important aspects of synthesis, because it really is the thing you're noticing a lot of times, and that's also why it's one of the big knobs, right? One of the great things to consider in synthesis, often it's like it can be a bit intimidating. There's all this information on a synthesizer. There's so many knobs, there's so many words and concepts to work with. But the thing to know very often is that the big knobs are the ones that you want to play with most. And cutoff frequency is almost always one of the big important knobs. And actually, let's hear what that is. So I'm going to start with that same preset, the synth mook init, that we use for every song that we make in or every patch that we make in this class. Will always be starting from that same exact starting point, a very simple patch with very little going on, and we always kind of build up from there. Now, I'm not saying that's what you'll always do in your music. I think working with the library and starting from those great presets that are built for you is often the best way to go. But if we're trying to train our ears here, we're trying to understand what we're hearing, and to do that, I think starting from something very, very simple is the best way to go. So I'm going to load in that synth mook init patch that was distributed in the course, and you'll see it's super simple. Right? My modulation for transmod is all empty, and not much is going on. So good question, Jack. Jack's asking if there's any difference between the Berkeley version and the full version of Strobe 2. The only difference is it's a long demo, right? So we have it's the standard version of Strobe 2, does everything that Strobe 2 does. Only thing the Berkeley version is a long demo, so it can last the length of the course and a little bit more. So if you already have Strobe 2, I would say don't install the Berkeley version and just stick with Strobe 2 and you'll be fine. If you have Strobe 1, I think you will want to install the Berkeley version of Strobe 2 so you can follow along with the classwork really well and easily. But besides that, I think they're the same. Berkeley Online version and the regular version are the same, except the online version is a long demo. So we do see that there's these big knobs, right? We have this pitch knob, which is really big. That's an important one, of course. And we see cutoff frequency is the other really big one. And we'll talk about PWM in a moment. And so very often what we're doing is starting with a very bright, buzzy waveform. And the standard kind of starting point for a lot of different synth patches is a sawtooth waveform, which we're seeing in our scope here. The scope is going to give us a lot of great information about what's going on in your patches, and depending on where you're hovering your mouse, you're going to get different information in the scope, right? So if you're hovering over the VCF, or the voltage-controlled filter, you'll see filter information. If I move cutoff frequency, you'll see that filter changing right there. If I'm in the oscillator section, or hovering over the oscillator section, you're going to see the waveform that we're creating. And so let me play a note in Strobe here, and let me know if how the balance is between my voice and the synthesizer. If one should be louder or quieter than the other, just let me know and I can adjust that. I don't really hear exactly what you're hearing out there. So if I play a note, we get this very buzzy waveform, and that's a sawtooth waveform. Now, like I said, the filter is like super, super important. And if I start bringing that filter cutoff down, we get rid of that high end. And I think, in almost all patches, the thing I'm adjusting most is going to be that cutoff frequency knob, right? The controlling of brightness, super, super important. It's one of those things that a bright sound will naturally draw attention to itself. You're naturally going to be drawn to the brightest element in a mix, and as you make something brighter, it's going to really kind of identify to the audience that this is something that they want to listen to. So putting this in motion is one of the key aspects of synthesis. Now, throughout this course, I mostly use the default, the LP4, or the low-pass, 4-pole low-pass model. All right, thanks, Alex. I'll lower the volume of my Strobe just a little bit. I'll go to negative 12 dB on that, and let me know if it gets better next time I play a sound. Thank you for the help. So I usually use the low-pass 4-pole filter, right, which is a very standard synthesizer filter, and that's going to be the one that we focus on most in the course. But do know that there are a wide variety of filter types, and so one might think at the outset that having only one filter in a synthesizer, a lot of synths have two filters, but the fact is there actually are kind of two filters, because these filter models kind of combine multiple filters. Like that is a notch plus a low-pass filter, right? So that's a really nice kind of aspect of this. You'll hear that if I move to the N2, L2, the movement of that cutoff frequency now has this really cool phasey quality to it, right? And I love taking just a patch that has been using like a low-pass filter and switch it over to one of these N2, L2 options, one of the other filter types. You'll notice that it has a drastic impact on the sound. And throughout this course, what we're doing is we're kind of creating templates, these starting points. My videos in the course are not meant to bring you to like an end goal synthesis patch. They're kind of designed to bring you to a starting point. They're saying like when you're creating a kick drum, at the end of my video, in the class, you're getting like a starting point for a kick. And then you have to modify it and play with it from then on, because I feel like learning synthesis is all about experimentation and about play. It's really not about, just getting a very specific endpoint. I think there's a limited use to just giving, okay, this is the finished patch. I think it's much more useful to kind of play around. I'm going to switch this so you can see the whole of Strobe. Yeah. So one of the things that you might want to experiment with after you've created one of the patches in the class, right? Maybe you've created a bass patch, or you've created a pad, and we've used the low pass 4 in the patch. You might want to start exploring different filter models, and that would be a really good way to kind of extend the patches we're making. Because a lot of the assignments in this class are you make that starting point with me, and then you go on and explore, right? So a lot of it is like, well, what do I play with? What are the good things to explore and to modify from that patch to create your own and kind of find your personal voice and to decide, oh, I really like this thing, right? And so I think changing filter types really, really important because they do just sound great. And Strobe really does have very nice filters. Now it's such an important knob that you may want to start manipulating it with one of the knobs on your keyboard. How do you guys have like a keyboard with a bunch of knobs? You know, like a nice MIDI controller. What do you guys have for MIDI controllers? Because I have a ton of them. You'll see behind me in my room. There's like a ton of MIDI controllers. I love knobs and having kind of hands-on access. So I'm curious what controllers you have, because if you do have a controller that has MIDI knobs, then you can use those knobs to control any of the knobs here in Strobe, and I love having that real-time control. And so I'll just show you. If you hit CC Learn here, everything turns green and blue, and any one of those things that's green can be mapped. Right, it can be learned so that it can be controlled by a knob on your keyboard, and it looks like, oh yeah, Novation Impulse, awesome stuff. Colin, if you're going to continue on with music production, MIDI controller is essential. There's really no way to. I don't think there's any way to really create music without it. I mean, some people do. They plug things in with the pencil, but I think a MIDI controller really makes it way more engaging. And the cool thing is they're not that expensive, right? There's lots of great controllers out there that are very inexpensive. You might even consider like even one of those Korg nano controls, right? It's just a bunch of knobs, so you can do all this stuff, with it. So I'm going to click on this cutoff frequency and just turn one of the knobs on my controller, right? And now I'm just moving a knob on my controller. I can get out of CC Learn mode, and now that's being controlled. Right? Very cool stuff. And so any knob in this can be done that way. And I would tend to just like do that and just start playing with the knobs, so you really have, this kind of engaging environment instead of just, instead of being so mouse, you know what I mean? I think it just makes the experience much better. So CC Learn, really powerful. I'm going to read this question. Well, Sergi, yeah, sometimes you do make these really powerful synth sounds, and it doesn't fit in the mix. But the thing is, once you have the whole mix up, then you can at that point tell kind of what the song needs, and things like EQing the track after that, and often removing effects. What I find is often a synth sounds really huge, kind of on its own, but when it gets in the mix, it can be too much, right? And that often happens with library presets, because library presets for me and here and kind of everywhere, they're meant to sound great by themselves, So you're playing the synth and it sounds great in the guitar store, but when you get home and you put it in a mix, it's just too much. And often it's removing effects and it's filtering more, just making the synth smaller. So if you have a good like big sound, you can always shrink it up to make it fit in the mix. And usually it's about filtering more, using that cutoff frequency to filter it more. Maybe EQ after it to make it fit a little better. And I find it's all often about kind of making it smaller. And so if you might want, if you're liking a library patch and it's just too big for your mix, or it's not fitting the mix, I would often go to the effects section and just start turning off effects. I find the reverbs and delays that are often built into library presets are what can clutter up the mix. And if you can just turn those things off and you can shrink the sound down a bit, then often you can make it fit much better in the mix. But your one thing I kind of disagree with in your statement there is if it feels like you're saying that tons of time was wasted. And I think that's mistaken. We have to really think that music creation is a beautiful process. We have to enjoy the process. We can't always focus on the end goal, on the product, right? The fact is it's not like it's not all about the product, right? It's about this process of making, and the process of making is enjoyable and it's interesting. And I find for me that that's really the value of like working with synthesizers. It's that I enjoy the time, and that whole time you spent, maybe it didn't lead to a product you use in a song, but that whole time was also ear training, right? As you're moving that cutoff frequency, as you're looking at those times, as you're hearing those variations, your ear is getting better and better and better. It's just happening on its own. So it's not wasted time. It's actually really, really valuable time. I think part of it is just accepting that it will take time to develop things, and it will take time to develop your ear. And all that time that you spend exploring is hugely, hugely powerful. Not just because it's going to make you better in the future, but because that was an hour that was really enjoyable, right? And we need more of that in our life, and we need to embrace the process. We have to recognize that making music is itself a beautiful process, and we have to kind of engage and enjoy that, and recognize it's not all about a product. Yeah, so that would be my kind of pushback against that. Is it wasted time? It's beautiful time. It's time well spent. So as we go through this, I'm going to switch my filter model over back to L4, which is usually my favorite starting point. Now, I want to talk about one of the things that I always mention at the beginning of each one of these patches. And I think it's one of the, there's some questions I'm always asking myself as I'm starting to make presets, right? I want to right away just think how I might use this thing, right? I kind of put it in a category. And if I'm making a bass sound, I want to say, well, you know what? Bass sounds really should only have one note played at a time. Like the vast majority of the time, bass sounds only have one note played at a time. And the benefit of that is one of the things we really try to avoid is low-end dissonance in our mixes. We have to be very careful what's going on in the bass frequencies. And I think this relates back to the harmonic series. In the harmonic series, we have all these low intervals and in the low frequencies, right? So you have like maybe have that low note, then there's going to be a harmonic double its frequency, and a harmonic at 3 times its frequency, at 4 times its frequency, and those get closer and closer as you get to the higher frequencies. So the low frequencies have these really wide intervals, and the high frequencies are really close on just any standard waveform, right? These partials are there in the air, and they're really close in the high frequencies. And so that sets up a standard of what kind of we like as humans, I think. I think it's related to it at least. And so, and it's a standard in composition. If you take composition classes and orchestration classes, you're often using these low kind of wide intervals in the bass frequencies, octaves and fifths, and then the upper frequencies you're much more likely to use like thirds, half steps, whole steps, these kind of tighter intervals. And I think, again, it all goes back to the harmonic series, and that the harmonics are closer when they get higher. And so we try to avoid almost all the time having small intervals in the bass frequencies. Often it's just one bass note, right? And you're not playing the chords. Your chords are played in the upper frequencies, in a higher register on the keyboard, in an upper octave. And so we try to avoid these really tight intervals, right? But they're easy. It can happen automatically, as you're playing the keyboard and you start like playing close notes or complex lines, notes will start overlapping. Or someone mentioned before release time, right? If you have release time that's long on a note, it's going to cause that note to kind of drag out or kind of fade out slowly at the end of the note, and that can kind of interact with any other notes, right? So if you play a line that has a whole step in it, those release times can cause things to cause low-end dissonance. And so in bass lines, and I know when I'm playing electric bass, I was an electric bass player at Berkeley. Playing electric bass, I worked so hard on my muting technique so that if I played 2 notes on different strings, I wouldn't get these kind of low-end notes that are kind of overlapping and causing dissonance. So one of the things I'm thinking is, well, how many notes should my synth play at a time? And so we have this big kind of division between a monosynth, which allows one note to be played at a time, and a polysynth, which allows many notes to be played at a time. And so one of the first things I'm asking myself when I make a synth patch is, do I want to have multiple notes played at a time? And so I do that down in my voices section. Right? And so over here in Strobe, we have our voices section, which is going to say 1 right here. So my default patch will have 1 voice and the synth mook in it. And so if I put that to say 4, I could play a chord. right? But if I set it to 1 and I do that same pattern, then it's only ever going to let me play 1 at a time. So played in the bass notes, I'm never going to have overlapping notes, which is really cool. Now, as I move forward with this, that's also good for like lead sounds. You only want one note at a time. So the cool thing about that is once you have this set up so there's only one note played at a time, then you can work with glide time. And you'll notice a lot of sounds that we like in popular music, it kind of glides between notes, right? And so I can turn up, once I've set voices to 1, I can turn up glide or key glide so that now I can say, okay, if I play 2 notes, it's going to glide between them. Now, there's 2 ways that can work. In one way, it'll always glide, which is how we have this set now. So like it'll always glide no matter what. So if I play a high note and a variety of other notes, and I separate the notes, it's always gliding. I prefer to have legato on, which means that it's only going to glide if I play notes overlapping, but it won't glide if I play them separate, right? So if I just play, it just jumps to them, but if I overlap notes, we get these glides, and that makes it so I can actually turn that way up, and because I can control when it glides or when it doesn't. Right? Not gliding, but now I get that glide, which I think is pretty fun. So you've been wanting to learn about synthesis for a lot of times. I'm happy to help you out, Philip. Do we cover sound effect synthesis in some way? For instance, creating wind sounds. Well, I mean, yeah, there's an effects section, but I think I approach things a little differently in that if you really start learning synthesis, it becomes kind of obvious how to make wind sounds. You know what I mean? The more we kind of train our ears and just learn how to create these basic patches and really dig into what synthesis is, then it becomes pretty obvious. And so what do you guys think wind sound is? Let's try to make one right now. How can I adjust this patch so it creates wind noise? What do you guys think? How would we make that? So anytime I'm thinking of a synth patch, this is the process I go through. I try to vocalize it. And so if I was to make noise, I would go. That's like how I would make the sound with my mouth. And I always use a vocalization if I'm trying to create a sound to kind of let me know kind of what's going on. You know what I mean? Because our voice, our vocal apparatus really does have the same kind of pieces that a synthesizer has. We have an oscillator, which is the sound generator, and that's our vocal folds. And we have a filter, which is our mouth shape, right? This is a very variable filter, and this is our oscillator. And we'll notice that the oscillator that we have, our mouth, the oscillator we have, our vocal folds, well, that's going to control the pitch of the sound. Now, noise is unpitched. We're really not using our vocal folds. We're just kind of blowing noise through our mouth, right? And so I'm really not worried about the oscillator so much. I just need it to make kind of general noise. And then I'm really working, and I'm noticing that as I do this, I'm moving my mouth, right? And so that's telling me that in this synth patch, I really have to work with the filter. I have to make that filter change, right? And so what I'm thinking is, okay, what's changing over time? So what's changing over time is the filter changing over time. And change over time in synthesis is modulation. That's kind of is the definition of change over time. And so what I'm really thinking is, okay, I need to create noise, just general purpose noise, and I need to have a filter on it, which is my mouth, and I need to move that filter around somehow, okay? And so that's going to be kind of my basis of this patch. So I'm not really worried about the oscillator so much. And so I'll just go to the main oscillator, I'll turn it off. My sub oscillator, well, doesn't really matter because we're really not using our vocal folds. We're just running noise through a filter, right? Through our mouth. So I'll turn that off. We have this noise section, which I can turn up, right? And now let's hear what we get. Noise. Now if I move the filter, and again, I can use my controller for that. We get kind of a wind-like sound just by me manipulating that cutoff frequency manually. And, very often people will look for, things within the synthesizer to kind of do things automatically for them. But I really like that manual control. And even with this, I get this. Now, one thing I might try with this is think, well, how can I get different kind of character noises? What are different varieties of wind noise that I can make? Well, if I was to try different tone on the noise here, let's try that. Interesting. Oh, thank you, Jack. I appreciate that. Yep. And so I might try to try just manipulating the filter, and I might try different filter types, right? And I also might try this tone knob. And we notice that this tone knob is kind of like a filter, right? When it's down here, it's kind of really dull, and as I bring it up, becomes really bright. So this is kind of a filter on its own. I'll pull that kind of right in the middle, or close to the middle, and then I'll try different filter types, right? So we notice that the low pass filter is going to always leave that bottom end in, but I found with my mouth, what I liked is that there really isn't a whole lot of bassness to it, right? It actually is just kind of upper frequency, and actually the noise I'm making, or the wind I'm making with my mouth, is more it's kind of whistly, you know what I mean? And it doesn't have a lot of bass. So I might just try different filter types. I'll put this in the middle. Oh, bandpass 2 is cool. Oh, 4. That's kind of nice. That sounds a lot like the wind I was making with my mouth. It wasn't quite whistly enough though, right? Like the wind I was kind of imagining was like maybe wind going through a window or something. So there's a little crack that it's going through to cause like a real kind of whistly character. And we have this other aspect of filters, which is resonance, which is an emphasis at the cutoff frequency. And so if I increase resonance here, you'll see it in the filter model get really peaky, right? And I can adjust. And now we get a real kind of wind character to it. And just manipulation of that is kind of nice, right? That cutoff frequency. Now, I think I've pushed the resonance too hard. In fact, if I go harder, we actually get a tone, right? And so if we push that resonance too hard, it actually turns into an oscillator of some sort. So I want to get it just before that, so I get that really good character out of it. Now, one thing I can start thinking of is, okay, I can manipulate it manually and get these kind of variations, but maybe I can go a little further with the synthesizer itself to give it some variations in how that wind is moving. Maybe some slow back and forth would be nice. Maybe a little randomness would be good, so it's not totally just staying in one place until I manipulate it manually. And I think we had people kind of mentioning using an LFO, or low frequency oscillator, to do this. And that's a really good idea, and I think we should try that. But before we do that, I also want to add a little bit of effects. I think a little bit of reverb on this would be really nice. And I'm bringing this up right now because this is also one of those ways that we can extend the class patches to be really good kind of right away. You know what I mean? We can take those kind of templates, just put a little bit of effects on them, and that can reinvent it really quickly. So let's look how we would add maybe a reverb to this noise. I'm going to go over to the effects section, and then in my first effect here, I'm going to see if we can add a bit of reverb. And I'll try the tin can reverb. Now, in some ways, I think it's poorly named because tin can makes it seem a little bit cheap somehow, right? That's a tin can, right? But honestly, I really love this reverb. I think it can sound really, really nice, and it has honestly some really cool creative possibilities. Now, every one of these effects has a mix control, and if that's all the way to the left, we'll get no reverb. So all the way to the right, we only have reverb. Right? And so I'm going to put this at about 20%. And depending on your effect, you may want to have a lot of that mix or not. And there's also a mix knob for the whole chain of effects. Now I'm going to use a pretty long decay. I'm going to turn my size back a little bit. Actually, want even more decay than that. Yeah. So we get that kind of release on things. This is another reason why I like using controllers to control parameters with my synthesizer. Lots of synthesizers have different pages, and so I can't see my cutoff frequency and manipulate it with my mouse right now, but that MIDI learn still functions. Right? So I can kind of be experimenting with manipulating the synth, even, synth parameters, even when I'm in the effects section. So I'll turn up this mix a little more. Now, one thing I'm kind of concerned about too is when I play a note, the wind just starts. And I would kind of like it to kind of swell in a little bit and then release a little bit, right? I don't want it to just like turn on. I don't want when I hit a note for it to kind of swell in. Maybe the wind kind of picks up, And so if we're concerned with how the dynamics of the note change over time, then or change with every key press, then we want to look at our amplifier envelope, which is right here. This is our amp envelope, and we'll get a nice display of it right here. And if I want a note to swell in, I'm going to increase my attack time. And I also want it to kind of fade away. So the idea is I want to kind of remove the idea of it's loud manipulating the patch. I really want it to be like, okay, you hold the note, and it makes the sound. It doesn't sound like I'm starting and stopping things. Maybe this would be good in like a background of a song to create the environment. I love this kind of sound in like a breakdown section. And often in breakdowns, I'm going right down toward the kind of the vibe, right? I'm trying to look at the environment. I'm giving the audience I'm giving the audience the context for the music. You know what I mean? Like you can say this music should be listened to on the beach, right? And maybe you create a little bit of wave noises and you have a little bit of wind. And if you're just stating this is beach music, well, that kind of lets us know like some of the emotional context for the song, So I love this kind of sound to be really quiet in the mix, using during the intro, during breakdowns, to kind of, give people a context, okay? Or is this like driving music, you know what I mean? Maybe it's like a more heavier rush of wind, and this is like, just like driving music, And so I love that idea of creating a context. And then the introduction, we can use an environment to kind of pull people from their natural listening environment, like are they in the room or where are they, into your environment, right? So we can place them somewhere else before the music really starts. And I love that kind of, how do I transition someone from their natural listening environment to the environment you're creating in your song? And I think these environmental noises like this are really good. I think also, samplers and audio files of those kind of environments, really powerful as well. But I'm also going to increase the release time here quite a bit. And we'll see if we can play this. That's cool, right? I like that. It's nice, and I might even do a bit more release time. All right. Now I want to give this sound some motion even when I'm holding a note, right? So we have our amp envelope working. The amplifier envelope is always controlling the main amplitude, and now I want to give this a little bit of automatic motion. Now, one thing you'll notice is if you play various notes, we will hear the filter moving, right? If I play middle C, we see the cutoff frequency is there. If I play an upper frequency, right, and if they overlap, it moves, right? And so that's because we have this keyboard here up high, right? That's telling us how much key position is modulating the cutoff frequency. If I was to put this to the middle, which will be 0, then no matter what key I play, I'll play a low note on the keyboard or play a high note on the keyboard, it's not going to change the frequency of the filter. I played a very low note, I played a very high note. It's not moving that filter around, right? If I turn this up, then as I play different keys, we hear the filter move. We see it move there too. Now, if I was to put this toward the bottom, if I played a high note on the keyboard, it's going to play a low cutoff frequency. And if I play a low note on the keyboard, it plays a higher frequency, right? So I've just inverted the modulation. And so you'll see this kind of 3-fader control throughout the interface. That's also how pitch is controlled, my main oscillator. It's how pulse width modulation is controlled, right? We're going to see, and so we see it in all three of those places. And so those are the things that keyboard can control kind of right off the outset. But I want to give this a little bit of variation. And now that I'm doing this and I'm having this keyboard control, I kind of want to have multiple notes played, right? Because then if I have this keyboard controlling cutoff frequency, I could play a chord and I would get a whole bunch of filters in a variety of different locations, and maybe it would create some better noise for me, or maybe a different quality of the wind, or maybe winds going through multiple gaps to create these little resonant peaks. So I'm going to change my voices up to 4 and see what happens now if I play multiple notes. That's nice. It allows me to play many now. Right? So now I can play many notes at a time to get this kind of fuller wind. I can play really low ones. You get a rumble. Now, one of the things to note, which is kind of cool about that, is as I play these many notes, the filter diagram is always showing me the last note that's played, but we can hear that when we've exceeded the 4 voices, then it'll start gliding to the newest one, right? It's going to remove the last voice you play, kind of voice stealing, and it's going to glide to the newest note you played. So you can create all these shifting timbres just by playing more and more notes. Oh, great to have you here. Cool to see you again. And so that's a really kind of fun thing. And so what we have is kind of a polyphonic modulation there, in that we can have this kind of glide even with many, many notes, even with polyphonic. And a lot of synthesizers don't give you glide with polyphonic patches, but Strobe does. Now, I want to make this the key glide really slow, so that way when I do start exceeding those voices, it turns into very slow variations. I think that's working well, right? So if I play 4 notes, I start adding notes, you start getting this really slow glide. To me, that's getting pretty effective as creating kind of, and we have a variety of winds we can make now. But even if I'm holding a single note, it'd be nice to give this a little bit of motion. And to do that, we're going to engage the LFO. So the LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, and it's going to create slow cyclic motion or random motion, depending on the waveform you're using, to control a parameter. And I'm going to have my LFO control my cutoff frequency. And to do that, I'll raise up this fader right here, and that's going to say how much LFO is controlling cutoff frequency. Very similar to this keyboard one, which was saying how much key position is controlling cutoff frequency. Well, I'll turn this all the way up, which is going to be too much, but we'll start seeing it go crazy, right? And if I try this, right? So I think I like to put it in motion, but I think now it's going over too wide a range, and it's going too fast. And so if I was to decrease this, that's going to decrease the range. And right there, we just get a little bit of wobble, right? So often you just want to have little bits of modulation to create that little wobbling. Which I think works well. It's a little moving too fast for me now. And so I might go to my rate, which is going to control the rate of that modulation. So now I'm just going to turn this up a bit just so I can hear what I'm doing, and I'll turn up the rate first. Now, one thing I like to do, well, we'll get to it later. Right, that's making the LFO move fast. Slow. And I'll do it over a small range. It's getting pretty creepy now. I kind of like the creepiness of it all. And we have different waveform types. Now for wind, I might not, I don't want it to be just this cycle, right? As soon as it's going to be an obvious cycle, it's going to sound fake, right? It's going to sound kind of mechanical. That's not how wind works. And so if I change the different shapes, you'll see the changes, you'll see the shapes change in the scope there. I can change it to be a bunch of different kind of randoms. There's a bunch of different types of randoms. And I'm going to actually increase the rate so we can see it a little easier. And so this ramp white noise is using a white noise generator to generate random numbers, and then it's moving between them. And that now starts sounding like wind. Right? Because now we have this kind of modulation and this variations that's not so cyclic. I think it sounds really good. Now maybe that's moving a little too fast. I can slow it down a little bit. I think there's my wind. I'm digging it, right? And so now I'm just going to save this patch, right? And so I'll just go to Save As. Now, every time we save a patch, we want to make sure that we're using the kind of defaults. Not the defaults, I'm sorry, the standards, right? And so we want to make sure we start the patch with the two letters that kind of define the category. And so this is going to be FX. And then I like to then put in a creative name for it. So I'll call this Spooky Wind. And then I like to use a 3-letter kind of tag for my own name to kind of define who it is, right? It's the patch that I made, and I go by LDN, and I'll hit save. And so that'll be added into my Spooky Wind Loudon. Oh, it's funny, my computer automatically replaces LDN with the word Loudon, but okay. So I'd rather that be LDN, but that's okay. So we have our wind. And that's the kind of process I would go through. Yeah, Jack, I think that's because of my the application I'm using to streaming. It looks like it doesn't grab the sub windows when I do this, but it's good to know in the future. But you see where it's saved right here in the user library. So that was a good patch. I think that worked really well. Now, the cool thing is there's a bunch of stuff we can do with that to make even crazier things, right? We could try doing some really nutty modulation to create some of these effects. And so someone mentioned, oh, what about like laser effects and that kind of thing? Well, let's try to make some. We'll use these same ideas, but we'll make something a little bit crazier, all right? So maybe a little bit unusual. And so I'll leave most of this in place, but I'll create something a little unusual from it. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn cutoff frequency way up. Turn my resonance way up. Now, as I start turning resonance up, it's definitely going to increase the level of your patch. And so what I find, you could just decrease the volume to kind of compensate for that. But one thing I like to do is just use a compressor. And often, if you look at the patches that I like and the ones I make, I'll go to my effects section, and the last thing I'll add is a compressor. And this way, if you really do get like high resonance, it'll automatically bring down the level and keep the patches a little more even across the keyboard. And it just allows you to kind of tweak more without worrying about the overall level. I kind of like it just to take care of level for me. And so I'll just come in here and I'll add dynamics, and I'll use the basic compressor we have here. Now you'll have to, if you know about compression, that's awesome. If you don't worry about it. The only thing I would suggest is turning up ratio at 4 is perfect. And now let's see what we get. So now we got this like sickly high resonance thing, which is pretty fun. If I look in my type, and if I change my library to none, and I look in type under drum, yeah, mine isn't really coming with any drums either in the default library. Yeah, interesting. So I thought it did have some. Yeah. Good catch. Thanks for mentioning that. I guess you'll have to create them yourself. Luckily, that's the first thing that we look at in the class is creating a kick drum. So, interesting. Thanks for letting me know that. I'll have to mention that in the class. This is really, really helpful. Thank you. So I want to do something kind of fun with that. We got kind of whale calls, right? But what if I was to use my envelope? Well, stickmen don't rely just on strobe, right? Strobe really isn't ideal for drums, really, right? You can't just do everything with a single tool. It's never going to work. It's going to sound really, really. You want to engage with lots of tools, and so not everything should be synthesizers, right? You're going to use samplers, you're going to use audio files, you record stuff live, you use synths for what they're really good for, So don't feel like and don't make your tune with just strobe. You want to engage with all the other things that you have access to. So drums, I would go online and find drum sounds and just place them in the DAW. So you can create a really cool groove. Doing drums and doing all your drums with a synthesizer, I'm not sure that's really the best approach, I think rarely do we find a song that's made with only a single tool. Yeah, exactly. There's lots of options. So every patch we make in this class, no stickman. That's an assumption, man. Don't use just strobe, right? Pull from everywhere. Use, and the thing is, I'm teaching you kind of step by step, right? So if I only show you how to make a drum sound and how to make a bass sound, you need a whole lot more than that in your mock-up that you're making the first week, right? We're just talking about synthesis and adding it into what you're making. Yeah. Use everything you have access to and just try to employ strobe inside of it. Make the way you do and just kind of add more and use these synths to kind of beef that up, to add to it. Yeah. So the next thing I'm going to look at is how can I create maybe a laser beam sound, these really kind of fast lasers and stuff, which can be kind of fun, right? And I'm going to try that with the mod envelope. So a lot of squeaking, knocking, clicking sounds are created with fast either pitch modulation or fast filter modulation. And since we have this filter kind of making a tone, right, then we can actually, if we move that really fast, we can get kind of all these knocking, clicking, squeaking sounds, which would be really good for maybe building up, percussion stuff. And so I'm going to try to use the mod envelope. First thing I'll do is reduce the cutoff frequency of the LFO, right? So LFO is not controlling cutoff frequency anymore. That's actually pretty nice too in itself. Right? And that's just using the filter as an oscillator. But what if I got the envelope to control it? So we have a second envelope called the mod envelope, for modulation envelope, and the default is that it's going to control filter cutoff. And I'll turn that way up and see what happens. Interesting. It's kind of cool. Right? Now, what if I start manipulating my envelope, though? I'm going to turn sustain all the way down. And I'm going to start turning attack up. Well, that'd be kind of cool for a slow riser. It's kind of cool, right? To have a really slow riser in a tune, really kind of powerful effect, useful in the background of a mix. if I reduce resonance on that, what am I going to get? Which is also really cool because now you have these big like white noise risers, and I think having the reverb on there and having the compressor on there really helps with that as well. So that's a great another really great sound. But if I go back to having high resonance, and I'm going to turn attack down, I'm going to turn decay up. Right? We have those cool kind of laser sounds. Now I want this to be a little stronger at the attack, so I'm gonna now go to my amp envelope and reduce its attack level. So we get that like clicky sound that ends in a tone, right? For this, ooh, that's kind of nice. I kind of like that. And that reverb is dramatic. And maybe if I play a lower note. It's kind of cool. I can change the amount. There's another good way to create a kick drum sound. And if I go to my effects, maybe reduce this reverb all the way. We get a cool kind of a bass sound that has a tone to it. But now I'm getting kind of annoyed that there's multiple voices and they're overlapping. So I might turn my voices down to 1. And if I want it even harder, I might turn my drive up. There's a point where it just distorts so much you don't get the tone anymore. Right? Then decay time. It's kind of cool, distorted, and kind of a laser beam sound, right? So even with just, and then one of the cool things we can do, which is pretty unique to Strobe, is we can loop the envelope, which is fun. So it'll keep doing it, and now I can, if I reduce decay time. That would be cool. That's cool, right? I might use that in like an introduction, record this to audio and create a cool, transition, maybe with something like that. Now, I really like that sound, right? The idea that automatically that thing decays and we can have like an acceleration or a deceleration. And I want to kind of mention the kind of final really big concept in FX Expansion Strobe 2, which is how do we kind of have more advanced modulation, right? So all the modulation we've used so far is like the built-in hardwired modulation. We've had like envelope controlling cutoff frequency, LFO controlling cutoff frequency, key position controlling cutoff frequency, and we've made most of our stuff with just noise and the filter. Actually pretty cool that all this just came from noise and a filter. Oh, sorry. And I haven't even used my oscillators at all, which is really kind of crazy, I think, that so much can come just from noise and a filter, and even sounds like an oscillator here. But what if I want some more complex modulation? In that we have this ramp mod right here, right? And this ramp mod is kind of can slowly change over time every time you hit a note, right? And it's like an additional envelope that we can work with. And what if I wanted that ramp mod to control this decay amount, right? Because I like that in motion, right? When I started here, right? I kind of like that kind of deceleration, or maybe the other way around, to get faster and faster. And so I want my ramp mod to control that. And this is the kind of other big concept, which they call transmod. And so to make this happen, we have all these open modulation slots here, which I've zeroed out in the init patch because I find having all that stuff right in the beginning to be a little bit confusing. And so what we define here is a modulation source. And I'm going to click on the top half of my first one here to define the modulation source. And my modulation source in this instance is going to be my ramp. And so I'll find in all these menus, I'll find the ramp here. And it'll probably be in the synthesizer section here. Let's see, do we have ramp? Yeah, ramp plus. All right. So I'm saying that ramp plus is going to change something. And now, anywhere I hover, we're seeing all these kind of highlighted slots, right? These are all things that now can be modulated by the ramp plus. If I click right in here and drag up, we're defining a modulation range. We're saying that the ramp modulator is going to control this decay time over the yellow range here. It's going to start at the knob itself, right? So it's going to start at the setting. You hear the bias point of the setting you chose for the parameter, and it's going to modulate over this range. And so now I'll try this. And we see that the ramp mod is controlling this decay time over that range, right? So we set that range. Now, if I click on the parameter itself, I'm changing that bias point. So I'm changing like the start point of it, right? Which is good. And if I click in the area above the knob, I can choose the range. So I can change the end time, right? Which is pretty cool. Right? Now, if I want that to take more time to go over that range, I can go back to my ramp modulator, and maybe I can increase the ramp time, so it's going to happen a little slower. Which is pretty slick, right? Now, if I increase this and then go the other way, I'm inverting my modulation. And so it'll start slow, and then it'll speed up. Right? That's just kind of neat. Maybe we'll even start it slower and make it go even faster. Right? That's kind of neat. Now, we can have the ramp modulator control many different things. And that's kind of one of the big benefits of this transmod system, where a one modulator, the ramp mod, could control multiple things in my patch. And so let's try to have it also control, what about... What about reverb amount, right? What if as it got faster, it got more reverby? Let's try this. I'll go to the effects section. And we have this big reverb. I'm going to actually turn this. And I'm going to turn this mix all the way up. Let's hear this now. Right? Now I want it to start dry and then get wetter. And so I'm going to turn my mix all the way down here. So now... Right, that's kind of what I want, right? So now I'll go to I have my ramp selected, transmod slot selected. I'll hover around the outside of the knob, so the outside is highlighted, right? We see a ring around the knob. Click and drag up. And now, if I play... Autobots, I love it. It's kind of a cool sound, right? And so that idea of making one of these modulators and using a mod slot here and having it manipulate parameters, really, really powerful. As you can see, as soon as you start engaging in this, now you can have that one modulator do a ton of different things within your patch. And that's another way that you might want to kind of take the patches we're building in the class and then extend them on, right? Add more modulation, explore the different oscillator variations, explore the different filters, right? Really cool stuff. So I think I want to start wrapping up here. And so I'm gonna show this guy. So I kind of want to start wrapping up here, and I just want to give a chance for, are there any kind of final questions that you guys have right now that I can address before this broadcast is over? And then are there any questions about the class, about how the class is going? And we'll be doing more of these broadcasts in the future. So if you have a topic, maybe this is a good time to bring it up. So yeah, what do you guys think? Hey, Sharon, great to have you here. Thank you for the wonderful shout out. I appreciate that. It is, Sergi. So this is, I have a Coursera synthesis course out right now, and this is just kind of hanging with that class and doing a broadcast related to synthesis for it. Yeah. In the class, we're exploring Strobe 2, and we're also looking at just electronic music production in general. A lot about like form, yeah. What's happens is every time I switch, the encoder goes crazy, but then it'll get normal. Okay, so polysynth stuff definitely we'll explore in the future, and there's a ton of it in the class, like making chord patches, particularly when we get to the unison stuff, which sounds really good. But I'd love to do a chat on making a big polysynths, because actually Strobe is amazing for that stuff, particularly when we get to more advanced modulators. So I was trying to work us up to transmod. I find the transmod stuff is really, really useful when working with pads. So we'll get to it for sure, and maybe we'll do that next week. Side chaining. So we can do that. It's a little bit outside the course here, because we don't really have in this course. There's no required like compressor. But we could talk about that. One thing you can think of is, side chaining is often kind of a pumping with every quarter note, right? And so I might just create that on my own without side chaining. I find often when using side chain compression, and for those that haven't kind of explored side chain compression, the idea is you have one track that's kind of interacting with another. So maybe you have a kick drum that's pumping every four on the floor, every quarter note, and then something else is responding to that in some way, changing volume or changing filter cutoff, something like that. So we can kind of, the challenge is when you start using a lot of sidechain compression or just sidechaining in general, everything's related to each other, right? So you change one thing and it affects 10 other things in your mix, which I find after a while becomes difficult to work with. And so I'll try to get those same types of sounds using different methods. And let me show you real quick a method I might use to get a pumping kind of sidechain sort of sound without really using sidechain compression. And so if I go back to... Oh, that's good to know, Stickman. I'll talk to the admin of the Facebook group, and we'll make sure we can make that happen. That's another good comment. Thank you so much for that feedback. That's really helpful. And so let's just make a really basic bass patch. And the sidechain compression kind of idea is in one of the other lessons in the course. But let's try this. I'm gonna just go to artist, none. I'm sorry, library user. That'll be all my stuff, and I have that synth mook init patch that we always use, and I'll just start from there. And then work with my cutoff frequency. So one of the things I want this to do is just kind of raise up with every quarter note, right? And that, which is a lot of what sidechaining is very often. And so I can have my LFO controlling my cutoff frequency. Get some drive on there. Maybe get sine sub-oscillator. So we get a nice big bottom end. Add in a bit of square wave. Yep. Pulse width modulation. Right. And now I can try to make it synchronized to the tempo, and I can use the right shape, right? And so I'm going to switch from cosine mode, and I'm going to try to find one that just kind of ramp up, right? Saw up. That's like Muse, isn't it? What's that Muse song? Madness, right? He plays it on the bass. Sounds a lot like this. This kind of square wave bass is killer, right? And then I can put it in sync mode, and so that way my rate is related to quarter notes, and so that will always that'll always be in time with my my song, right? So that gives us a lot of that kind of side chaining quality. Now, one of the cool things about this is now we have this swing parameter, which gives us kind of variations in it and give us a good feel. Right? Now, here's a trick. And I know I don't have the DAW open, and I think in future broadcasts I have to have my DAW open so we can like have a groove going and see how it relates, and we'll do that. But this gate section is one of these really kind of the things that one of these aspects of Strobe 2 that I love, because it shows the developers are really thinking carefully about how you might want to use your patches. And so if you want an LFO to always be in time with your DAW, you might want to set this to song. And what that means is that, you know, usually when you play an LFO, it restarts the LFO, so you hit it, and that's always going to be the beginning of the LFO shape. But let's say I set this really, really slow. I'll do like a whole measure. So that's like whole measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. And we'll have it go over a wide range, right? Now, if gate is set to poly, which is going to be the default, if I hit multiple notes, it's always starting at the beginning of that ramp. And so you'd have to play this right on the downbeat to have that swelling be in time with your song, right? To be in kind of, I guess you would say, in phase with your song. It's always going to last a measure, but where does it start, right? Now, if I switch this to song, now that's swelling up over the whole measure, regardless of when I start the note. And so, thank you, Jack. I need to get better at this, right? I was planning to wrap it up, and I got caught up. So this is great. Let me do this and mention those couple things. I appreciate it. So I have my synth sound set up. I have my LFO here configured to control the cutoff frequency of my filter, and this is the gate section right here that I've been talking about, and I've set the gate to song. And this makes it so that as I play individual notes, that's going to keep moving regardless of if I hit a key or not, right? So the LFO isn't restarting every time I hit a key. And the benefit of that is I don't really have to worry about being perfectly in time anymore, right? The LFO is always going to be in time. And if I play multiple notes, right, or if I put this rate back to quarter note, and then I can even have my glide on, which we talked about earlier. Long. Oh, yeah. I know because that the song gate is on, because I'm synced, that this will always be in time with my music, right? It's going to be every quarter note. So we get that side chaining sound, and I might even want to choose mono here also. So there's only ever one an LFO. So if I had this in poly mode and I was using this for like chords, I would only have like kind of one LFO that's always in time with my music. So song gate, really cool aspect of this, and kind of unique to Strobe 2 in a way, because they really thought about those details of how should this LFO be restarted. Yeah. So this is a really great patch, and we'll actually make one very similar to this when we do the synth section. Yeah, well, for the Benny Benassi stuff, I might even then want to go to effects and add like a high pass filter here to get rid of some of that extra bass bottom end, which can be useful for Benny Benassi style stuff, right? So I might want to get another filter. Let's see if we have a good one here. Yeah, we'll go with the EQ4 and reduce some of the bass stuff. Right? And so this one's just gonna be that high stuff, but then I can add another one here that's gonna be same settings, but it'll be just, oops. And so now how I set this up is I can where this is all the high-end stuff and this chain is all the low-end stuff, and then we can start processing them differently, right? So I could put, say, a distortion on this, right? And maybe I can boost up the bottom end here, you know what I mean? So you can have all your high stuff up here and your low stuff down here, and then you can kind of process them a little different, which I think helps with getting that like super powerful bottom end, but then that kind of gritty high end that I hear on a lot of the Benny Benassi stuff. Cool. All right, guys, any last questions before we close this down? So, Berend, yeah, that's a good idea. Save the patches. So you're talking about the Spooky Wind patch. Maybe this one. Let me fine tune this a little bit before I would want to post it. I'm not getting exactly the sound I want here. I'll have to play a little bit. There we go. Yeah. Okay, let's see what I can do here. Ooh, that's cool. That's grimy. Yeah. And then I would put a compressor over here too. I love compression. I'm working on that, Jack. I'm gonna try. We'll see what I can do. Depending on how good this went, maybe they'll agree. That's a really good idea, though. There we go. That's cool. So the cool thing about this one is now I have this stuff is the high end, right? And I put a chorus on the high end, and then this stuff is the bottom end, and I just have a big compressor on it. And so I have like a nice kind of distorted and chorusy high end, nice big stereo high end, and nice solid bottom end. So I'm gonna save this here, and we'll call this. So this is gonna be bass. It's gonna be wide pumper. LDN. Cool. All right, guys. Let's close it down now. This is a lot of fun. Let's close this down now. It was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed kind of this kind of process. You know, thank you for working through the whole streaming process with me. As we do this more, I'll get better at the switching and just thinking about all these little details. But I really love the idea of having online chat, having the kind of broadcast. This will be available. The whole chat will be available as a YouTube video right on my YouTube channel. Usually, they said it'd be up within 24 hours, right? So it should be available for you before tomorrow, and I'll just be looking at it. Thanks, Berend, for the idea of posting those patches in the class. I will. I'll see how I can do that, and we'll make it happen. Yeah, thank you so much. If you have any other questions for the chat, for future chats like this, I'm open, and we'll see what we can do. Yeah. Sharon, thank you so much for being here. I hope the YouTube video is up and available for you later tonight. They said that YouTube said that within 24 hours, so it should definitely be around as soon as possible. Have a great night, guys. This was a lot of fun, and I wish you all the best. Really enjoy the course. You know, remember that just make, right? The whole thing is we just got to make a lot, right? So yes, we're talking about synthesis, but we're also creating a piece of music. Every week you're creating a piece of music, right? And you can develop from the previous one. You can kind of build on it. We call it drafts. The idea is you're creating every week, and you're kind of, you know, making better what you already made and trying to incorporate the sounds that you're doing there. If you're feeling that what you made last week is just not right at all, then just start over again, make a new one, right? The most important thing is you're creating every week. And I like the idea of sticking to this 40-bar format because it creates for us really important musical sections: introduction, build, you know, breakdowns, grooves, climaxes, and endings. We want to be thinking in these musical terms and these like big musical forms, creating kind of complete musical statements. And the more we do that, the better we'll get, without a doubt. And so thank you so much for doing this with me, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.